Let's get ready to ink. This is Johannes Gutenberg. Who? Gutenberg. Johannes Gutenberg. Was he a failure? No way. But if you haven't heard of this German goldsmith turned printer, don't feel bad. Historians have done a pretty good job of making sure most people don't know much about him, and yet he changed the world. So let's take a crash course in Gutenberg history. If not for Gutenberg, Columbus might never have set sail. Shakespeare's genius could have died with him. And Martin Luther's 95 Theses would have hung on that door unheeded. In fact, without mass quantities of books to burn, the Inquisition could have fallen flat on its face. The printing press, developed by goldsmith Gutenberg in the 1430s, helped spread truth, beauty, and yes, heresy throughout the world. We know the Chinese had movable type for centuries before Gutenberg, but they used it for silk printing, not books. Gutenberg, however, always had publishing in mind. Copies of his first major project, the Bible, survive today. He worked for years to perfect his system of movable type and a press that could mass-produce books, leaflets, and propaganda. What little is known about Gutenberg comes from the many lawsuits filed against him for the rights to the invention. But no one successfully challenged Gutenberg's place as the Western inventor of movable type and the printing press. It was 1450, and Europe had just begun to emerge from the Dark Ages. A plague had killed nearly half the continent's population, and feudalism was under siege. In this era of upheaval, new ideas spread like wildfire, thanks in part to Gutenberg's printing press, which historians say transformed society and helped usher in the Renaissance and Reformation eras. Gutenberg, born around 1398 in the German city of Maine, started his career as a goldsmith, a profession requiring precision, patience, and attention to detail. These were useful traits for an aspiring printer. However, we know little about Gutenberg's early life. Even his name is a mystery. He was probably called Johannes Faust. The name Gutenberg comes from a street in Strasbourg where he lived for a time. In the 1450s, Gutenberg came up with the idea of adapting existing typesetting techniques to make books more cheaply and quickly. Until his innovation, books were copied by hand, a painstaking process. Typesetting, originating in East Asia, allowed printers to arrange individual pieces of type in reusable frames. After each page was set, the frame was inked and pressed onto a sheet of paper or cloth, transferring the raised type. Once the page was dry, the type was reset for the next page, and so on. However, this method was slow going because arranging and rearranging the type was still labor-intensive. The breakthrough came when Gutenberg conceived of a printing press that could apply pressure to the inked type, forcing the ink into the fibers of the paper. Gutenberg developed a complex system of movable type in which each letter of the Latin alphabet, along with punctuation marks, numerals, and even some illustrations, were cast in metal. His press, a heavy affair consisting of a screw press and a bed to hold the paper, applied pressure to transfer the inked characters onto paper. By the end of the 1450s, Gutenberg had printed several thousand copies of a Latin translation of the Bible, possibly as many as 180. The Gutenberg Bible, as it's called, is notable for its 42-line pages and elegant design. It remains the oldest known book printed in Europe, with more than 40 complete copies surviving in libraries around the world. But success didn't come easy. Gutenberg ran afoul of the law after entering into a business arrangement with two backers. Gutenberg apparently failed to repay a loan, leading to a series of lawsuits over the rights to the printing press. As these cases wound their way through the courts, Gutenberg was ordered to stop using his press. Frustrated, he fled to Alsace in what is now southwestern Germany. There, Gutenberg met a man named Johann Fust, who provided him money for a new printing operation. Fust became a partner in the business and married Gutenberg's daughter. But once again, Gutenberg got into financial trouble, owing thousands of guilders, the main currency of the Holy Roman Empire at the time. According to legal records, Fust took Gutenberg to court and won sole ownership of the printing press. Undeterred, Gutenberg continued printing books, but he produced fewer and of lower quality, often selling his work to traveling salesmen who hawked them in town squares. Some experts believe Gutenberg's health was failing, contributing to the decline in the quality of his work. He died in 1468 and was buried in a common grave, an appropriate resting place for a man who brought affordable books to the masses. Gutenberg left behind a legacy that transformed the world. Historians credit the printing press with helping to spread the ideas that launched the Renaissance. and Reformation, and allowing for the mass production of books, pamphlets, and newspapers. Imagine Europe without the printing press. Imagine Martin Luther posting those 95 Theses on a church door in Wittenberg. Imagine the pamphlet exploding across Germany and igniting the Reformation. Or consider Niccolo di Niccoli, an Italian Renaissance philosopher and theologian who made hundreds of copies of Greek and Roman texts, preserving them for future generations. Or think of the printing of the first newspaper, a weekly publication called Relation, published in Venice in 1476. Without the printing press, how would news spread? How would revolutionaries communicate their ideas? How would science and philosophy evolve? So let's get this straight. For centuries, the privileged few had access to written works, either through handwritten manuscripts or imported books from faraway places. Because of the expense involved, books were owned by the rich and powerful, and knowledge was their currency. Enter Gutenberg. With his printing press, he democratized publishing, placing the means of mass production in the hands of anyone with sufficient capital and skill. Well, almost anyone. Like most major innovations, Gutenberg's printing press wasn't immediately embraced. In fact, it was seen as a threat by many. When the printing press arrived in England in the 1470s, London's ruling council passed laws restricting printing to a handful of people. In Germany, officials worried that printed materials would undermine civil order and appointed a censor to approve all printing projects. But these efforts proved futile. The genie was out of the bottle, and the genie's name was progress. Gutenberg's printing press evolved over time. At first, the movable type had been cast in two pieces, a lowercase and an uppercase. This required printers to frequently change type, slowing down the process. Eventually, printers began casting entire lines of type in one piece, speeding up the process. By the end of the 15th century, printing presses were producing 8 pages at once and printing in multiple colors. While Gutenberg may not have been the first to invent the printing press, he was the first to conceive of a machine that could reproduce multiple pages of text on different surfaces, lowering the price of books and making them available to the public. Gutenberg's printing press also incorporated movable punches, enabling printers to cast entire lines of type in one piece, speeding up the process. After Gutenberg's death, printing presses spread across Europe, eventually reaching Russia, Turkey, France, Spain, Italy, and England. Books became cheaper, easier to produce, and more widely available. Gutenberg's press even contributed to the rise of literacy as people sought to read the printed word. One historian estimated that Gutenberg's Bible was the cheapest book ever published up to that point. Thanks to the printing press, books could be mass-produced. They were no longer unique works of art. Instead, each page was a replica of the other. People wanted books and lots of them. It wasn't unusual for wealthy patrons to commission entire editions. In 1471, one collector ordered 240 copies of Cicero's speeches. But the printing press did more than just make books cheaper and more available. It changed the very nature of books. Mass production led to the development of standard fonts and the concept of a bestseller. Publishers raced to print popular works before their competitors, eager to capitalize on the demand. In 1494, a publisher named Aldus Manutius developed italic type, inspired by Greek lettering. Books printed in italic were smaller and cheaper than those printed in Roman type. This innovation helped make books more accessible to ordinary people. But the printing press didn't just help spread literature. It played a pivotal role in shaping political thought and religious ideas. Consider Martin Luther and his 95 Theses, a list of arguments against the sale of indulgences, which were certificates that the Roman Catholic Church sold to pardon people for their sins. Luther posted his theses on the door of All Saints Church in Wittenberg, Germany on October 31, 1517. The document quickly spread throughout Germany and sparked the Protestant Reformation, which challenged the authority of the Roman Catholic Church. Luther wrote in the preface to his theses, quote, "I am sending this treatise to you so that you may prove by writing those passages which seem to me to require some explanation or which are alleged in your favor," end quote. Luther didn't write his theses with the printing press in mind, but once they were distributed, the printing press ensured that they would spread far and wide. One scholar estimates that between 1517 and 1521, more than 20 million copies of Luther's work were printed. and that was just the beginning. By 1530, Lutheran writings were being produced in at least 20 languages. But the printing press wasn't just used to disseminate religious tracts. It also helped spread scientific and philosophical ideas. Consider the works of Nicolaus Copernicus, who proposed the heliocentric theory of the universe. Copernicus, a Polish astronomer, argued that the Earth revolved around the sun, not the other way around, as long believed. His book, De Revolutionibus Orbium Coelestium, was published in 1543, just weeks before his death. While it didn't become widely accepted until the scientific revolution of the 16th and 17th centuries, the printing press ensured that Copernicus's work was read by a broad audience, laying the groundwork for the scientific method and helping pave the way for Isaac Newton, Galileo Galilei, and other astronomers who built upon Copernicus's ideas. And what would Shakespeare be without the printing press? The playwright's works, which include Hamlet, Macbeth, and King Lear, were first published in quarto form, meaning each play occupied a single sheet of paper folded twice. These inexpensive editions made plays more accessible to a wider audience, ensuring that Shakespeare's words could reach those who couldn't afford to see his plays performed. We can thank Johannes Gutenberg for the printing press, which he perfected in the 1440s. But the story of how his printing press changed the world is complicated. Printing in movable type had been around in China for centuries, but Gutenberg adapted the technology for European languages, developed an efficient system of movable type, and created a printing press that could mass produce books, leaflets, and propaganda. His first project was a Latin translation of the Bible, which may have included the first use of hyphenated lines of type. Gutenberg went on to publish a variety of texts, including a German translation of the Bible. However, financial difficulties forced him to flee Strasbourg in the 1450s. There he met Johann Fust, who provided him money for a new printing operation. But after Gutenberg fell into debt again, Fust took him to court and won sole ownership of the printing press. Undeterred, Gutenberg continued printing books, but they were fewer and of lower quality. He died in 1468 and was buried in an unmarked grave. In spite of his humble burial, Gutenberg's legacy is immense. His printing press helped spread the ideas that launched the Renaissance and Reformation and enabled the mass production of books, pamphlets, and newspapers. It placed the means of mass production in the hands of anyone with sufficient capital and skill, democratizing publishing and making books more accessible to the public. When Gutenberg invented the printing press, he didn't know the impact it would have on the world. But as the saying goes, history is made by those who make it happen, whether they know it or not. That's all for Crash Course. See you next time. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell button to receive all new clips. If you're not subscribed, it's very easy to do so. Just click the button right there and then click subscribe, and don't forget to activate the bell button so that you get notified every time we release a new clip.